मैं एक खास तौर पे आप सबका स्वागत करता हूँ आज के इस प्रोग्राम में। आज जैसे कि आप सब जानते हैं 132वां जन्मदिन है मौलाना अबुल कलाम आजाद का। और वो बहुत ही इम्पोर्टेंट फिगर हैं। और जैसा कि वीएम सर से मेरी बात हुई थी, उन्होंने एक बार बोला था कि उतना ज्यादा बात नहीं हो पाती उनके बारे में और उनके कॉन्ट्रीब्यूशन के बारे में हमारे बहुत सारे डिस्कशंस में, और हम अक्सर काइंड ऑफ वी जस्ट ग्लॉस ओवर हिज पर्सनालिटी. So we thought that it's a great opportunity to have a conversation about that, about what has happened in the Indian education, what was the vision of it, and it's a great opportunity to have that. And then, luckily for us, Professor Bhatpayal has agreed to come and give this talk. और बटप्याल सर को सभी जानते हैं, उनके लिए कोई इंट्रोडक्शन की जरूरत नहीं है, मगर ही इज अ प्रोलिफिक राइटर एंड अ प्रोलिफिक रिसर्चर. एंड आई वाज जस्ट टेलिंग हिम कि मैंने अभी अभी मेकिंग ऑफ यूनिवर्सिटी पढ़नी शुरू की है. So I'm very very excited to have him, and we are all very very grateful to him for agreeing to come and join us today. So now I think I'll give the mic to Professor Bhatpayal, the metaphorical mic, and let's listen to him about the vision of the idea of excellence in the educational vision of India.
Thank you, Ankush, and thank you, Vijayji, and Rajiv Gandhi Foundation for inviting me for this very, very special occasion of 125th year of Maulana Abul Kalam Azad's birth centenary, birth celebration. You know, I have some very, very peculiar relationship with Maulana Abul Kalam Azad, in the sense that I come from the city and where Maulana Azad was interned during the Khilafat non-cooperation movement, that is Ranchi, where he set up what is called Madrasa, a center for learning, which later on became what is called Maulana Azad College. I used to be in what is called St. Xavier's College, and I used to always wonder why Maulana Azad College was such a, in local term at that point of time, such a third-rate college. And because, you know, when you are young, you are very proud of your own college, its standards and quality and all. And then we also had what is called Azad ground, Azad colony, and they were really dirty. In your youthful mind, you could see all these. And I used to wonder why Maulana Azad is identified with these kind of things for the local mind. As I grew and started reading, you know, as reflection, and today in the mid-50s, one could see it better. You know, I don't think we have produced a much more refined, civilizational personality than Maulana Azad. Very rare. And in fact, he was so rare that there are very few people even to appreciate that rarity. And it is a very interesting consequence or a kind of coincidence that even in jail, in, for example, Pune, Arvada jail, Nehru always found a company in Azad, and both found company in each other. So the two very, very refined, sophisticated, cultured men found in each other's company a satisfaction of their, what would we call a cultural taste. So therefore, this association with my youthful non-understanding of many things and gradually coming back to understanding a lot of things, in between these processes of 40 years, has something very peculiarly happened in the country, and that is gradual, in a way, the discourse of decline of institutions. Now we are reaching a stage where we have to actually save certain institutions from complete destruction, including my own university. So in this sense, therefore, remembering Azad becomes much more important. And I thought, when I was approached, that idea of excellence could be a good idea to actually remember him on his day, and through one of his closest companion, who actually found him as his cultural companion, that is Nehru. And in bringing these two personalities together, I want to propose certain couple of ideas, couple of propositions in front of you. The first is, what is excellence? Now, since independence particularly, we, the educationists as such, the professional educationists that we have, and one of Azad's, in fact, educational advisors, KG Sayadain, in fact, has written that, in India, the education would be changed not by professional educationists, by philosophers, historians, and whatnot. So Azad, Tagore, Gandhi, Nehru, none of them were educationists, but they were all philosophers, political actors. They were trying to set education right. Today, in fact, if there is a right-wing shift, a communal shift, this is also done not by professional educationists, but by people with an ideological bent of mind, ideological set of parameters with them, using political levers. Therefore, the two paradigms, the two frameworks in which education and professional educationists all together, along with others, have worked on education, agitated on education institutions, are first access, and that means equality, access to equality of access, and the second is quality. So quality and access today, for example, are the two parameters in which all educational discourses, educational issues are discussed. Now, on the issue of access to education, the issue of equality comes in. So therefore, a lot of political debates on, a lot of political actions, a lot of political empowering acts are done so that everybody has an access to institution, to education, to books, to anything that you associate with education. But in the same time, when education becomes a mass movement, where the masses come and join educational institution, at the same time, it happened in Europe, it happened in US in the 50s and 60s, the issue of quality becomes very important, because many people of different stratified reasons start worrying about quality, because if large number of people come, the quality must be declining. This is a kind of assumption that society holds, and therefore quality becomes important. Now, the issue of quality has been taken in recent years, last 20-30 years, by a particular political formations, a philosophical formation, which in the West was called a new liberal formation. That quality is important, excess we can wait. Now, in the name of quality, what has been emphasized by a large number of people across small towns, big towns, metropolitan cities, are infrastructure. That you have to have very big infrastructure, very first-rate infrastructure, and that is, in fact, in many ways, it becomes synonymous with quality, and people actually associate with that, because government structures, public structures, they show that there is a neglect, there is a decline, there is a malfunctioning structure, and therefore any good structure must be qualitatively a higher structure. So these two frameworks in which educational discussions, education policy making, everything is happening around. And therefore, quality education, from international schools to international private colleges to institutions of excellence, and everything is about quality. On the other hand, the right to information, right to education, fundamental rights, access to education, all this about education. Now, are they mutually exclusive or they are not exclusive? These are debates which frame a kind of spectrum of different people taking different sides, different institutions, different sides of the spectrum. Now, for us, for this evening, however, I will frame it different, because I'm not a professional educationist. I'm trained in history. I try to understand history philosophically, and therefore education in which I have an investment, because I'm a product of those institutions which are called public institutions. And therefore, I will try to bring in certain kind of insights in which I reflect on institution which produced a person like me and produced persons like me in millions and across the world. Now, after independence, there are two immediate concerns. Immediate concerns for anyone who were thinking about education. One was colonialism, and the second was independence. Colonialism would mean that the concern of reinventing India, restructuring India, and reformulating education in the country, and not only education, society, economy, polity, culture, would require a rupture with colonial structures. And therefore, critique of English, critique of the public, private colleges, schools, elite institutions, um, elite institutions, and the kind of connect, Oxford, Cambridge, all this connect has to be. Similarly, promotion of science and technology, and in the and discounting too heavy a load of liberal arts, humanities. All these things were part of what we used to call it colonialism. And the biggest thing in this was starting institution. Now that got associated with the idea of independence. What was the idea of independence? And this set of ideas, the set of ideas that defined our notion of independence had been set for the previous 100 years, maybe 80 years, maybe 50 years, maybe, which also defined the core of national movement, that we will be an independent country, will be self-reliant, will be prosperous, will be developed, will have a scientific temper of society, which will enshrine the most progressive ideas of the times. For example, socialism in 1920s, 30s, 40s, it was the most progressive idea across the world. So democracy comes and the socialism comes, and therefore the idea of modern society, which imbibes the theories of democracy, socialism, equality, and all these basket of ideas, becomes part of our idea of independence. Therefore, post-independence, while we wanted to dismantle the colonial structures, we also wanted to set up new structures where all these ideas could be enshrined, could be habilitated, and which will create a new Indian. A new Indian, a new man, as they called in the Soviet Russia, that the Soviet Russia was creating a new man. Similarly, we wanted to create a new Indian, and that new Indian would be a robust, cultured, aesthetically superior, talking about science, talking about politics, talking about globe in Committee of Nations, which, for example, people like Nehru, people like Krishna Menon would articulate in a completely confident manner. It is in this context, therefore, education also, the goals of education were also set. Now, in these two, the spectrum that these two set, I wanted to actually bring in, and that I've been trying over the last almost a decade now, to bringing the idea of excellence. Now, excellence, as my teacher who died a couple of days back, Professor Bhamri, would tell me, "Bete, excellence has no constituency in this country." So nobody seems to be, the moment I say excellence, the left would critique you that, no, what is excellence? No, nothing called excellence. It is all relative term. Class-based society will not have this idea of excellence, because excellence is also class determined. On the other hand, my caste-based theoretician would attack me with what is caste, because the Dalits and the upper caste and Savarns and all these things, because that is also excellence would mean you are actually talking about in a very casteist manner, in the upper caste manner. So these are, one is torn asunder between these two extremes. But I'm sticking my neck out, I'm sticking my guns and say, look, excellence is not about what you're talking about is merit and non-merit or whatever, the socially constituted parameters in which you grow. But I'm trying to posit, habilitate in the idea of excellence in something much more deeper, much more, I would say, aesthetically much more deeper in our society, our cultural, our historical sense. And I would therefore invoke one of the philosophers, Aristotle, who brought this idea called human flourishing, eudaimonia, that how do you live well and you flourish, all your elements come to full realization of themselves. And therefore he gave this beautiful word called eudaimonia, which is human flourishing. But then he brings out the idea of virtue, the excellence, cultivation of these virtues. What are these virtues that he was talking about, which brings excellence? Takes me back to the ancient Greek philosophy, but I'm not taking you back there, I'm trying to bring out some elements and talk and define what I would mean excellence in our own context. Now, let me read out a passage for you. Excellence becomes a Greek virtue. Greek word virtue is arete, best explained by Aristotle, came closest to the word which I'm trying to use, excellence. Excellence becomes a virtue defined as a mean between two extremes. Two extremes, as Buddha would say, madhyam marga. Two extremes of excess and defect. With regard to a feeling or an action, you can be very angry, you can be very without any sense, but the excellence would be habilitating somewhere in between. Similarly, an action could also be the same. As a practically wise person would determine, a wise person, a cultivated person will determine what is the excellent action, what is the median response. Bereft of its mundane explanation, the ideals of Satyam, Shivam, Sundaram may come close to the ideal of excellence, but becomes very unapproachable because of many reasons, because you cannot even go to that abstract level for an ordinary people like us. Excellence in all these expressions as a virtue was seen as exemplified by two varieties, moral and intellectual. Intellectual grows out of teaching, so that's why you need institutions. Moral virtues comes out of habit for Aristotle. So we must be, as I quote him, we must be brought up in a particular way from our youth, says Aristotle, so as to both delight in and be pained by things. We should pained by things that we ought, for this is the right education. Aristotle makes it explicit when he says that, I quote, it is by doing just acts that a just man is produced, and by doing temperate acts that the temperate man. Without doing these, no one would have been no one has the prospect of becoming good. So it's a matter of habit. To be excellent, one, by this ancient definition of excellence, requires an ecology. So where do you practice this habit? How does this habit come? We talk about family, we talk about many things. In modern time, I would say institutions are very, very, very important places where this habit which cultivates your moral personhood happens. This ecology, defined in turn by the notion of autonomy of excellence, is also a self-willed growth and training. It is not by somebody saying these 108 values you practice and you become excellent. No, these virtues have to be self-willed also. It is closely associated with institutions where virtue, both in its moral as well as intellectual level, is trained. The ecology that provides autonomy to institutions itself is prepared by a context. It is therefore important that one understands the idea of culture, which constitute the milieu in which autonomous institutional practices called excellence finds university as one of the most important places of this habitus, this place where excellence is practiced. Now, I study here Nehru's idea, and then I'll come back and join you with AZAD. Jawaharlal Nehru, being a conscious practitioner of nation building, was also acutely aware of the need for institution building, and university was one of them. Now, his idea of the new Indian nation, as I was talking about independence, was a nation of cultural effervescence. This generally is not discussed by people about, and one of the finest collection of essays in the early years on Nehru was by C.D. Narasimhaiah, the English professor of Mysore University. One of the finest collection. People like Mulkaraj Anand, so people of taste would, people of culture, as we associate them, would often talk about Nehru, but that part has somehow been neglected over all these years. Freedom of India to him should have let India develop a new and confident culture. After Industrial Revolution, I quote him, he told the young students at Nashik in 1950, and with the advent of machine age, the life of people has changed. Their value got a new orientation, and all these had its effects on their national culture. He wanted to see this dynamic culture pulsate Indian life. This culture was crucial, as he saw, and also intrinsic to the excellence and high standards of civilization. Thus, he saw institutions that were being created as sharing this cultural sense and aim at the highest possible standards. Speaking at the inauguration of the Agricultural University at Jabalpur, he invoked the idea of excellence. I quote, "Whatever we do, we should aim world class." Now we have a situation now where we actually deride world class by saying you are from Harvard, I am from hard work. Nehru is saying whatever we do, we should aim world class. In everything we do in this country, Nehru reiterated at foundation stone laying ceremony at the National Stadium in Delhi, we should aim at the highest level. Everything we do in this country, we should aim at the highest level. Inaugurating the Institute of Sugar Technology at Kanpur, he also expressed the same thing, that this institute should be world-class institute. So excellence was, now this is one sense, he was asking people to have this habit of cultivating the sense of highest achievement. Excellence was intrinsic to culture, this culture that I am talking about. Culture for him was rooted in the country's past, and all efforts to make understand the past richer elicited his enthusiastic response. So it is not that he's trying to prevent people understand history. He was much more than what he generally is projected. In 1949, when S.M. Katre, the renowned linguist and the director of Deccan School, for example, wrote to him seeking support for a Sanskrit dictionary project, Nehru instructed that the proposal was very important and must be supported. In 1956, dedicating the publication of the Sanskrit Mahabharata Shanti Parva to the world, it was done by the Deccan Bhandarkar. Nehru spoke eloquently at Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute at Pune about Sanskrit. That is one of the, he said, I quote, "It was magnificent language which, he thought, embodied the genius of our race and the strongest cultural manifestations of Indian people, and has been the inheritance of everyday living in the country, everybody living in the country, whether of north, south, or west and east." He supported all efforts to facilitate appreciation and writing history by and encouraging acquisition of historical documents, including the India Office Library. They started the process of discussing whether we should get back the India Office Library in India, but for some reason it got stopped. In fact, he had very strong emotions with the India Office Library, and he wanted the document back in India and initiated the process too. This past, however, to him needed conversation with the present and the future. Culture, for a person like his width and depth, if it had any value, I quote, must also have a certain dynamic character. Restricting culture to the past blind alleys or certain chosen elements, symbols of the past, however, was to stunt this cultural effervescence. Attack on English just after independence, and therefore to him was one such example. It betrayed narrowness of spirit, which would ultimately be harmful for Indian cultural life. Those who were denigrating English language and literature, he felt, were taking India to some shell from which one needed to rescue India. It is odd, he said, I quote, that just when India has come out of her shell after long years of subjection and coming into contact with the wider world, in its many activities, we should again revert back to a new shell of our making and cut ourselves off from the modern thought and activity. English, therefore, is a compulsory, and we should learn more. The anti-English rhetoric was getting strident in the 50s, very strident. It is again coming back in a big way. It wore the cloak of something called Indian culture, as it also sought to champion Hindi and Sanskrit in its place. By the early months of 1950, the president of the Congress Party, Purushottam Das Tandon, was talking about culture from the Congress presidential platform, and Nehru the very next day had to remind the audience that, I quote, "The most important thing to be clearly understood about culture is its international character. The fundamentals of culture are not," I quote, "the fundamentals of culture are not confined to the boundaries of one nation, and therefore the obsession with only Sanskrit or only Hindi being synonymous with Indian culture seemed like outbursts of the uncultured. Superficial things about culture, although they have their place, to him should not be stressed. One sees everything every time Nehru spoke at an university or talked of university, he indicated that university was the most fundamental spaces where culture is sustained, flourished, and shaped in time and space. University for him was, I quote, essentially a place of culture, whatever culture might mean. Speaking at the convocation of the University of Ceylon in 1950, he had reminded the audience that though there is, I quote, there is a great deal of culture all over the place, and I normally find that those people who talk most loudly of cultures, according to me, possess no culture at all, right? Unquote. First, culture was not loud and it's quiet. Second, every notion, and like I quote him, loud and quiet, you may judge the culture of a person by his silence, by his gesture, by his phrase of his, or more specific, especially by his life generally. The peculiar narrow idea of culture that is spreading is that culture depends on the kind of headgear you wear or the kind of food you eat or similar superficial things, which I do not deny have a certain importance, but which are very secondary in the larger context of life. Second, to him, every nation possesses a culture and it is rooted in a kind of history, which stamps people of some kind of special feature, indicating the universal template of culture. Human qualities are for him, are respected and honored in every country. I quote, in no country, he said, is deceit or fraud respected. Somehow we started respecting, I don't know why. In fact, others emulate the good qualities of a people. So in India, they should not confuse superficial things about culture with its fundamental. Our duty, I quote again, to make the country strong. Nehru to the core was a man of nation. However, his idea of nation was to him to, I quote, not to abuse others or fling mud at them. That lowers the prestige of a country. Strong nations meet every challenge in a forthright manner without resorting to cheap tactics or letting anger have the better of them. People should learn, I quote again, learn the great lesson the inscriptions on Ashokan pillars teach us, that a man, by respecting the religion and culture of others, increase the value of one's own. If the religion or culture of others is run down, to that extent, the value of one's own religion and culture is lowered. Third, while culture has its special historically constituted attributes and gets manifested in nation, it never remains within the nation state. Fourth, the dynamic character makes culture scientific in nature, and it invites people to make connections along space and time, and therefore requires intellectual investment in rationality, logic, and scientific explanation in terms of how things work. Nehru's, a lot of people have, therefore I listed these 4 or 5 attributes of culture that I culled from Nehru's understanding of culture. And you can identify many of the things that he was talking about is stridently anti they stand completely in a diametrically opposite stance of where we started sharing an understanding of culture in today's time. Now, relate this notion of culture as habilitating in an institution like university. And I'm giving this idea of university to make it much more concrete in terms of what I want to explicate later as sense of culture. Excellence. Excellence, as we saw, demanded training in morality, as we said, understood in its broadness, embedded in this dynamic culture. So moral, intellectual, both developments has to have some habilitation. Virtue, courage in its excellence form, for example, was seen by philosophers as a quality between fear and confidence. As I, in the first proposition suggested, that excellence is the middle of 2 extremes. So in this sense, for example, courage, which Aristotle and later, in fact, Socrates himself would say is a great virtue. Now, courage is in between, for example, fear on one hand and confidence on the other, overconfidence on the other, confidence and fear, and in between you have courage. Similarly, temperance between pleasure and pain. and liberality between meanness and prodigal. Now, they are trained in life and in institution. Now, these virtues, as Aristotle and then so many other philosophers, scholars, even our own parents have been training us, that they are trained these virtues of temperance, for example. You are neither very mean, you're neither prodigal, you are, in some sense, with the English word called equanimity, you are trained in your life situations. And in this sense, when we bring education in, the institutions where we go are one of the most important vital training spots. Now, what is happening in these institutions is very important things for us to watch, because this notion of excellence that is coming out of this habit of training is also very important for us to, in fact, live by. Prescriptive cultural morality becomes stale with time. I quote Nehru, prescriptive cultural morality or morality, that yahi karna hai, becomes stale with time. Indian universities, to Nehru, was to be site of such training. When the Bombay, and there are a lot of evidence I have written down for this lecture where we can suggest. In fact, from 1947 itself, I don't have to go back with my framework of independence and colonialism. Nehru personally was very clear that we have to have standards. We have to have notion of excellence. We have to have what I have defined just now, culture. When the Bombay government had asked the directors of the Shakespearean play Hamlet to cut the kissing scene, this is 1948, it was precisely doing so. It was staling. Nehru sent an angry letter to the premier there. Western classical music was losing. All India Radio was stopping Western musical, the time for Western music, classical music. And Nehru saw this as a losing of the robustness of our culture, that we are not able to appreciate certain things. He became increasingly concerned about both the continued attack on English language from different sections and also of the declining standards of language teaching itself. One of the greatest Sanskrit scholars, Mahamahopadhyay P.V. Kane, who had since 1926 single-handedly compiled the history of Dharma Shastra till 1962, in fact, too was displaying his unhappiness and anger at the way the state was imposing a prescriptive morality in the name of culture. He found this uncultured, Mahamahopadhyay P.V. Kane. This showed lack of class, lack of standards. I quote, "Now this faith in Eastern thought in itself being shaken, and so we have neither the old nor the new." He contextualized this loss of standards, and we drift not knowing where we are going. In fact, today I feel it much more than what Nehru was feeling in 1950s. The younger generation, he was so true, has no standards left, nothing to direct their thinking or control their action. To Nehru, this loss of standards, a subset of excellence, was worrisome, almost dangerous situation, and if not checked and improved, is likely to lead to grave consequences. We are actually reaping them. An optimist, he thought that it could be because we were passing through an age of transition, but in the atomic age, he cautioned, no country is likely to be given many chances to correct itself, and failure will mean disaster. We might have quoted disaster by now. The sense of the attack on standards and creation of ecology where moral and intellectual training can take place with autonomy, Nehru thought about the ways the university regains that culture to be excellent. First, to him, the rootedness of the institution to the local city or village was very important, as it endowed them with a civic consciousness. Civic consciousness, according to him, broadened minds and spirit rather than narrowing, as has been done in the garb of culture. It is in the civic consciousness, above all, which will constitute the emotional unity of people, fundamental building block of nationalism in modern times. The bad management of the university to him began with the bad selection of vice chancellors, fault lines with teachers and men at the top of the universities. Giving specific instances, I give you one instance where he writes a letter. In Allahabad, we have Vairavnath Jha, who is from outside the university. In Lucknow, we have Radha Kamal Mukherjee, who is good but ineffective. And in Agra, we are going to have C.V. Mahajan. We never seem to get out of this rut. So we are actually seeing something contemporary in the 1950s, 60s itself. He said we required earnest and enthusiastic people with evocation for education, person who has capacity to win the respect and goodwill of the students, men of some learning, and yet we go around the old way and complain about the students. Now, he was clear from the beginning that the universities be protected states from states encroaching arms. He had created the managerial and technical cadre for the industries, and in 1950s itself, the UGC to act buffer between the government and academia. He used to be particularly angry the way bureaucrats treated men of culture. When he was told how Satish Gujral, who had just come back from American sojourn, earning kudos, found himself evicted from his government quarter due to some government rule, his ire was directed against the bureaucracy, as he knew that the malaise began there. Conscious as he was that the local, national and cultural rootedness was important for autonomy of an institution, he insisted that the Indians publish their own textbooks, and the foreign agencies, particularly when the Americans were dumping them as part of their war of cultural influence. He, in fact, was instrumental in getting National Book Trust to serve this purpose. He found many joint Indo-American publication deals were very, very dubious in nature. In one of such instances, he wrote to the Minister of Culture, "I'm quite clear that Ford Foundation or indeed any outside agency should have anything to do with our book trust." He showed the same determined opposition to the American project of translating textbooks, etc., which he thought would be obsolete, fast, and second, the translation would not give the context to the student. To him, the autonomous intellectual growth happens when a country writes its own textbooks and books. The autonomy must produce a culture that tries and protect that autonomy. When he was told how BHU was run by the RSS, he pointed to the Chief Minister of UP that it was really extraordinary that all this galaxy of principals, professors, teachers, etc. should function in this way. To sum up, to Nehru, excellent world-class institution requires a rootedness in culture exuding a broad and universal horizon. Only such cultural template ensures the autonomy and vision for university to provide excellent ecology for moral and intellectual training. By giving this framework of the Prime Minister Nehru, one can now understand Azad better. I'm not going the other way around. Azad was their choice for education minister. From 47 to 58, he was our education minister. And if you think, on both this term, discontinuing, rupturing colonial structure and creating new structures where this training in excellence could happen, Azad is very, very central to understand. People have worked, and in fact, we have a Maulana Azad National Chair in NEPA, where a lot of work had happened earlier. But this part of where is the idea of excellence could be located has yet to be fixed. To me, it seems that what Nehru was talking about, the institutional building was very crucial. And institution building is not about opening up, like a lot of people have been critical of Nehru for not opening primary education. Now, these are secondary, we can debate on later whether he should have insisted on that. But given the resources and everything, but what my concern is, and my appreciation of Azad-Nehru combination is, and today, is that they had actually created the map for ecology of where the excellence could be trained in day-to-day affair. Whoever could be brought into this institution by working on quality and access framework. Now, in this ecology of institution building, you can see universities are very, very critical. Today, if you don't get good teachers of mathematics or science or Sanskrit in schools and colleges, actually the responsibility lies with the university, the decline of universities, or the kind of robustness that the university have. Similarly, the university also needed structures around them. And that's why Azad and Nehru would start Lalit Kala Academy, Sahitya Academy, dance, Sangeet Natak Academy, and then you have different institutions, museum, Grace Morley Nehru would invite, and National Museum would be restructured. So all these structures, therefore, are part where you are day-to-day testing. yourself, you develop your tastes of cultural artifacts, your tastes of aesthetics. And therefore, in one of the inaugurations, all three inaugurations, if you read Maulana Azad's lecture in address in Lalit Kala Academy, Sangeet Natak Academy and Sahitya Academy, he would say, Azad will take you to India's history as a rich history of these aesthetic departments, aesthetic functions of society, how rich it was. And then he said, we are reinvigorating by having this institution. We are rehabilitating them. And this is playing both the services, serving both the aims of bringing independence, the idea of autonomous, self-reliant, robust cultural existence, at the same time creating the ruptures between colonial structure without losing its continuity. In this sense, therefore, Maulana Azad's life has to be reread by Indian students every day, in the sense that you do not, and this is when Gandhi first came and wore that attire of a peasant, which Churchill said, naked fakir's attire. Now that gave a confidence to people, to the peasants, to the workers, to common Indians. Today we have multiple dress. In many countries you don't have. People have taken to the Western dress and they wear that. So that this cultural confidence that comes in, it also, Azad brings that confidence to you. Of a refined, you can be educated in Arabic, Urdu. You are what is called Oriental education. But you have that confidence of a culture, that I am inheritor of a 2000-year-old culture, 1500-year-old culture, and nothing, no narrowness can actually exhaust defining me. So in this sense, today when we are celebrating the 125th year of Maulana Azad, one must celebrate this robustness with which they try to create a cultural vision. And in that cultural vision, the institutions were central. And those institutions, therefore, needs our critical eye, our nurturing eyes. We are very unlucky in many sense that while in the West, institutions evolved over the last 500, 600 years and have got some stability. And that stability you could see in the way American, US institutions over the last 200 years, they have existed. So they showed that stability in the last 5-6 years, that you could see that stability. Ours, new institutions, the modern institutions were fledgling. They were coming in the last 70 years. It is in this moment of transition that we are talking about today, that Nehru was talking in the 50s itself. In this moment, this institution had the great role to play to provide that moral and intellectual training, which could have provided us the excellence, the idea of excellence, cultural excellence, cultural robustness would have come, and which is the fundamental of your scientific, your humanistic, your liberal, your moral life in the country. It is therefore, I end by saying, my proposition therefore is that at a time where there is, and you can sense this happening, what Nehru was indicating in the 50 itself, when there is a sense that there is a lack, there's no goal in the horizon. The lack is what about? People are talking about professional education, but that is not a standard that you're talking about. The standards are set by your cultural training, your taste, your understanding of aesthetics, your understanding of taste, in which, as I propose, excellence has to play a daily role. Your training in moral, your training in intellectual. Both life has to go, both training has to go hand to hand in an institutional setting. In that situation, we might be losing the road. And as Nehru said, in atomic age, no country will get a second chance. So we might be staring at a very peculiar situation where we are losing the race just when it began. Thank you so much. I'm open to question answer if you feel like.
So we all got muted and now we just got unmuted. Thank you, Professor. But it was really fascinating to see the panoramic description you made of the early thinking of of the two great people, Pandit Nehru and Maulana Azad, in helping build the foundations of educational institutions while simultaneously trying to address, the deconstruction of the colonial mindset, and yet constructing a new culture of excellence while being rooted in our own situation and addressing our own challenges. When one thinks about it historically, it's probably it was a world-class challenge, and it required the kind of intellect that those people had, and of course there were several others. I think they were able to attract, whether people like Professor Maulana or Bhava or Meghnad Shah or Shanti Swarup Bhatnagar, and I'm sure there were many more. Who then actually translated the broad sweep vision into specific institutional actions and so forth. Even an Ibrahim Al-Qazi at the National School of Drama. It's actually breathtaking for someone like me to sort of live in today's India, to think that when I was just a toddler, somebody was actually not just thinking but executing these things. In preparation for your talk today, I read Maulana Azad's speech at the inauguration of IIT Kharagpur, which he gave in August 1951. And, almost every important concept that we're thinking of has been articulated there, including industry linkages, joint research among practitioners and academics. I mean, cutting edge ideas articulated in 1951. So the one question, sir, that I want to ask you, and I don't want to hog other people's time, is, although you did hint a bit in terms of, that some of the seeds of decline were beginning to be apparent even during Nehruji's days. But what led to the kind of, you might say, at what stage did the weeds take over the plants, if I may use a agricultural analogy, What happened? I mean, by this, I personally trace it to sometime in the 80s, but I would have thought that by that time, these institutions of excellence would have become sufficiently firmly rooted to retain, an overall influence of excellence on the others. But they got inundated, So what are your thoughts on that?
Actually, my book on JNU has tried to get into this issue, and I'm still working. I recently the book on modern school that I just is released. Next week it will come into the market. I have hinted at that. I am exploring in a complete sweep, and your question is actually the central question that we all struggling. To me, from a social scientific perspective, we might have different paradigms to look at it. You see, I hinted in my JNU book that there is a discourse on decline, which was wrong when it was very prominent. It was not declining. In the 60s, for example, the talk of decline had begun. Now, there are sections which was using this decline discourse to use something else. For example, this scientific pool and all. A lot of people went and, so the brain drain. Now, that was a time when new classes were coming. The first generation was coming. I think this is one kind of, but in the largest sweep that your question requires thinking, I think there are two or three I myself thinking. It's not just now I'm reflecting on that. One is the colonial context gone. The context of institutions, for example, Madras, Calcutta, or Bombay, had gone, and Allahabad had gone. So the context in which they came up as being Oxford of the East or something of that, they had gone, because opposition to those institutions had already began in the 1920s. You see, Karnataka University, just take university as an example, because university feeds into the colleges, colleges feed into the schools or B.Ed or any other institution. So institutionally, the idea of excellence, if you see, Bombay University was attacked and Pune University came in the 20s and Karnataka University came in the 40s, Pune, Karnataka and Ahmedabad, Gujarat University. They came as out of Bombay. Similarly, Andhra and other universities came out of Madras. Similarly, there's a attack on Bombay. Patna came in 1920s. Banaras came in the 70s. So the colonial institutions were already under decline in that sense of being the center of attraction from 1920s and 30s. Now the post-independence, if you see what kept Bombay, Calcutta or Madras going for some time was the city itself, not the context. And to the macro level, Nehru is blamed by those who don't write. Today we are trapped, and the best micro example of the trap is Madras, Tamil Nadu. The macro is India, where the IIT frame has trapped all of us. We are not getting out of the trap. Now Nehru was very clear, and I can give you the reference, that institutions, professional institutions are professional institutions, they are not universities. Now what we have done over at least from 1980s onward, we have not thought through it, that this institution which creates a tunnel-headed, excellent, but tunnel-headed, it cannot train you in the moral and intellectual that I am hinting at, and I am developing that at a daily basis. It is the university which for a society like us is the only place where romance could grow, music could grow, anything could grow. And as the Western scholars are talking about, American scholars are talking about, the most Nobel Prizes are won by universities, not the private labs. So that debate, if you translate it here, universities were treated in a completely different manner. And the decline of that, now if you narrow it down, that decline was, you could see from 65. But that decline could have been arrested. What UPA, by starting 15 universities, did in 2004-5, that should have done in a measured way. But unfortunately, as historians know, that nothing you can do by wishing, because the 60s was such a tempestuous time for Indian politics that even if Mrs. Gandhi or anyone who wanted to do could not do, because politics came in. And the politics of the worst kind, the negative politics, it was not a Republican versus Democrat. It was everyone against one. So anti-Congressism had actually destroyed the North Indian universities. And I'm absolutely unabashed about it. Anti-Congressism of all kinds. So from Calcutta onwards, the main Gherao of 1971, there's a book by Sugata Dasgupta of the Gherao of Calcutta University. From Gherao of Calcutta University to anti-Hindi agitation and riots in Bikaner and Jaisalmer against Jaipur University, the entire swath of northern universities were destroyed. Destroyed in this sense, where they were habitus. Now, therefore, we are sitting at a time where we have actually lost clue of how to do. So university, UGC, randomly, in a completely different way, partly politically notion, but generally, we have no clue. So we have given it to the private university to correct our public university ills. That will not do. So to conclude and to take it further, I would say that colonial institutions began to be eroded by 1920s, 30s itself, where they lost. They sustained without any internal vigor for some time because the cities were live. Today, Calcutta University has gone down because Calcutta city cannot match Delhi's vigor. On the other hand, Delhi being a quaint little quiet city of your childhood is no longer that city, has become much more vigorous. So the universities show that vigor. Madras, on the other hand, attracts only students from Northeast and Madras, whereas Madras used to attract everyone from everyone. But the city, because of its industrial sustenance and growth and all, at least had that vigor. That is one. The second set, the universities which started in the 30s, 40s, 50s sustained, but 60s, I would say decline, but it was a sudden. In 2-3 years, we have done damage to the North Indian universities, Banaras and all these. That has actually affected all India, because the interaction that used to take place, if you remember, you have V.V. John, Vice Chancellor of Agra University, Gorakhpur University, even though that kind of a Malayali. Can you think of a Malayali scholar being a Vice Chancellor in a UP University in today's time? You just can't think. Similarly, a Bengali Vice Chancellor in a Kerala University, you just can't think. So we have boxed the universities. In fact, in every state now, for example, in Karnataka, you know which caste Vice Chancellor has to be in Bangalore, or Lingayat has to be there, or whatever combination, permutation. So we have boxed them. I think we need a very robust idea of excellence culture to be a political statement to come in. And I don't know who takes the plunge. Otherwise, there's this boxing we have left it to the private university to kill that box, which will never happen. So we'll remain in that box. I don't know. I'm still thinking, reflecting on this, but you are absolutely right. Where do we pinpoint? My response is this.
Thank you so much. I think there are some interesting points made in the chat. One by Janaki. In case Janaki, you're still there, would you like to raise that question directly?
So by the time Janaki ji joins, I want to thank Rakesh ji once more. और taking forward जो आपने growth के बारे में बोला, a shortened idea of growing oneself towards excellence. I just want to make an announcement. I think this is like the right time to do that. So we had started a website last year, and this year we are kind of trying to add more things to it and make a 2.0 version of it, striving towards excellence again. And I was just like, अगर पंकज जी उसको थोड़ी देर के लिए दिखा दे, और if Vijay sir could say like 2 words about our Sadbhavna Se Samadhan project, and then we can take the questions.
So, Professor, you won't mind if we just take this break for 2 minutes?
No, why should I? This is a good occasion.
It's very much linked to, actually, we wanted to release this new version of our website, which is called Sadbhavna Se Samadhan. Actually, there is Sadbhavna, Samvidhan, and Samadhan. The idea is that, you need a society with empathy, and in a sense, our constitutional values embody empathy as a foundational value. You can't have too much justice or liberty or equality or at least of all fraternity without empathy being the underlying value. But eventually, in the lives of common people, we are struggling with hundreds of problems. So we are looking for samadhan. So the purpose of this website is to start with empathy, but then look at the provisions that are there in the Constitution, both in terms of rights as well as institutions, and then work towards solutions of myriad problems that we encounter, and that may be just roti kapda makan, or it may be education and culture, or it may be India's place in the world, all of that. So, and this website is aimed at 3 levels of 3 ages. So school children, then college students, and then working adults. So right now it's mainly aimed at children, but it's constantly getting enriched almost every day. And of course, you can be sure that your talk, after a bit of editing, video editing, will go up on this under one of the 3 sections. So, So
The invite of it is already up on the website. So
right.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much for being so kind.
So I request Professor Badbel to formally just bless it or inaugurate it, and that's really it.
In fact, on your behalf, I have invited a lot of my colleagues, my friends, my students from across the country. So we are lucky to have from Bardhaman to Kerala to North Bengal University. So in that sense, their presence itself is such a nice, august, auspicious moment for this website. It goes across to teachers who can then take it to the children and other people. Thank you so much for actually doing this, because we have been in the university, have been actually feeling the lack of empathy at the moment. So anyone coming to show a glimmer of life is welcome, but it's more welcome when people like you are really concerned with these things bring in.
Well,
Ultimately,
I have to share a small anecdote with you, Professor. Since we are almost at the end of the thing, I studied actually in the lesser university next door. I'm from IIT Delhi, and I saw the JNU campus come up. Literally, I was there from 70 to 75.
Okay.
And when I finished, I'd actually fallen in. Though I'm an electrical engineer, but I'd fallen in love with biotechnology.
Okay.
And I applied to JNU for a MSc in biotechnology. I of course got rejected because I hadn't even done biology in school. But nevertheless, I could have made it to what I still think is the greatest university in India, irrespective of whatever's done to it. So, thank you
so much.
Yeah, I think now we can get back to the question. अगर जानकी जी हमारे साथ में है तो she had raised a question.
Janki, can you ask the question? I can't read. I'll read this. I can respond. Yeah. Janki's asking the same the question that I started with, that this question of access and quality, one, secondly merit and non-merit, these debates are there. Society is segregated, ruling classes, if you say the class dimension, the ruling and the ruled classes have their different parameters. But I'm trying to cut through all these and say that even if you have a house, for example, under Indira Awas Yojana, it has to be a good house. Why is it that a BDO is not from IIT? What I'm saying is, what has happened to this country that we have actually surrendered the idea of practicing standards, excellence in almost all walks of life gradually. So it's coming from ground, and therefore how to rehabilitate remains the issue. Even if we cover the idea of access, we give everyone schooling, but if you give them bad schooling, we are in fact doing a greater injustice than I can say I'm illiterate, but mal-literate is a far more suicidal act that we have actually committed over the years. Similarly, in the notion of quality, do we have the moral training that Aristotle is talking about, or Nehru was talking about? Do we do that in institutions after institutions that we are opening? Therefore, while there's poverty, while there's digital divide, while there's divide, there hunger, that is, these issues are there. They are issues of humanity, country, society, class. But yet we have to find this notion of excellence, this notion of standards, because ultimately, even from our JNU, those who talk most about access and all, the moment they find a chance to go to America, to a good university, they run. Why is it that happening? So therefore, to habilitate excellence is one of the primary conditions of making our institution relevant. So unless you are excellent, you are not even relevant. Today, a large chunk of our universities become irrelevant to our society, and that is precisely not because they are bad or declined, that because they have lost the sense of standard. Where should the standard? It's not that they are not meaningful. They are not mindful of the fact that they are not able to produce standard research. But what is that standard? Who will provide that standard? That question has to come from within, and that within has to begin somewhere. For example, JNU used to set standard. Today we have a Viva. 46 candidates came last 2 days. Most of the outside candidate wanted to be in from a small town in Sholapur. One guy who was a disabled person, he says, my greatest dream is to come to JNU to do some studies, and I want to come for PhD. I was almost in tears, because this is the standards that we have set, whichever manner, but that we have set. Now, every institution should set that standard. And this is what Nehru was talking about. These issues are there, they will be there, but this issue is equally valid and will be there. This is my response to this.
Thank you, sir. Paul, yeah, Mahalakshmi ji also has a question, and Paulami also has a question. Yeah, ma'am.
Yeah, may I go first? I thank you very much, Professor Bhattacharya. I just wanted to ask you to elaborate on something that you said, which is about the public university. You seem to be laying a lot of stress on rehabilitating the public university. And I was hoping that you could elaborate a little on that. The second thing that I was wondering if you could comment on, you have hinted on it through the lecture, but if you could elaborate again on this, is the issue of the state and institutions. Because on the one hand, while we are talking about excellence, as it gets habilitated in and through institutions, on the other hand, we do have a problem with the state intervening in institutional structure and process. And in the course of that, there have been certain kinds of upheavals and the notion of excellence also being affected by these. So if you could just come in on these.
Glad. There are two questions. One is how to rehabilitate public institution. The second is state and institution. Now, the public institution, there is a very mistaken assumption by many. Yesterday, I was going through a book in the bookshop on India's crisis of higher education, edited by Pratap Bhanu Mehta and one colleague. And except Apurvanand, who is there by chance maybe, but all other, nobody teaches in any universities. They're all in this institution, that NGO, this NGO, and they're all talking about public institution. Similarly, all this discourse of Devesh Kapoor and others, they are not product of any of the public universities in India. Indian universities, and as going back to Mr. Mahajan's question, Indian universities have been made invisible by our political leadership from 80s onwards, 90s onwards. We are not there. I am in the best universities in the country. I want my students to be intern in any UN agencies. I can't. Even I won't be taken as an intern in any of the UN or world agencies. But a third-rate student of a third-rate American university gets not only intern, he gets a job in UN agencies working on India. So these are the, earlier we understood this as a differential power relation with the first world and third world. But this power relation gets replicated within India, within our society, where our universities have been junked by our own leadership. This is where, today Suhas Palsikar or somebody wrote a paper, newspaper article, where it said Indira Gandhi meant nothing. She was everything to everyone, but actually meant nothing. But I think I completely disagree. Indira Gandhi meant so much, because she brought in the Indian intellectuals, Indian university professors in all her institutional setup. All our advisors were part of India's public institutions. So that is where the leadership should respond to in the public institution. Today, for example, there is, if an IAS officer could be a history student, I am not at all disagreeable to the fact that a history student is an RBI governor. In fact, RBI history would show that there are many general BA passed people were there as a RBI governor. C.T. Deshmukh was an erudite person, but his education qualification could not be that great. He is a scholar of Sanskrit. He stood first in Sanskrit. So it is not about that. No, why is it that none of the Indian professors from Indian universities, including institutions like IIM, why are they not there where IAS officer could be there? So why is it that we have denied, made them invisible? None of my JNU student, I'm proud of them, but tell me, is the political leadership is trying to put them in different institutions, make them ambassadors? Our our history, social science students are fantastic in their understanding, articulating, speaking, and everything. But when it comes to put them, none of them will be put ever in their lives as an ambassador without going through the rigmarole of IFS, the cadre base, or put as a Reserve Bank governor. Or now, for the last, in fact, 15-20 years, even JNU professors don't get placement in as a planning commission members. They are as a consultant, or some project is given to them. Imagine a professor from Gorakhpur Universities or Madras or some Mysore University getting a position in the planning commission. To me, therefore,
so for that, you now have to work for one of the big four.
That's right. So that's why I'm saying, you can rehabilitate this institution, and by first making them confident. You make them confident by giving professoriate the confidence. You can give professoriate the confidence by treating them something, they're your society's cultural repositories. The universities are your nations or societies or people, whichever term you want to use. They are their repositories. If they are in your institution, heading those institutions, contributing to them, then you give them the confidence of robustness. And that's what I think rehabilitation should start from there. But today what has happened and this culture has to also go, that you are suspicious of teachers as wo paisa maar jayega. So from the morning to the evening, you are just filling forms all the time. And so this happened where in the West, this happening here, but in the West, there's a commensurate placement of them in their co-sharer of the responsibilities of the nation. Universities are treated in India as not co-sharer now, as if they are burden. So no wonder, till yesterday, school teachers in Bihar or Madras or anywhere, school teachers were beaten up on the street. College teachers in Delhi University itself was beaten up. JNU teachers and students were beaten up inside JNU, and the society did not react the way they should have. That means instead of making them co-sharer, you have made them as a burden on the society. And this is where I think the road should not lead. The road of rehabilitating public universities is to make them co-sharer in your larger responsibility. Why is it that no professor is made a governor? And this is not just five years. It's happening for last so many years. And because a governor is a chancellor. And if you make a professor of JNU governor somewhere like Nurul Hassan was a governor, it gives a glamour, a response, a confidence, and an erudition to the not only post, but also confidence to the academia as such. And they are their academy. So that's the first question, response. The second is, it is true that the state now, the character of the state has changed, and it is a communally organized state, and almost all the features of what is called 21st century fascism, they have not acquired. But if you read any literature by political scientists about what 21st century fascism mean, we are actually staring at them. But given as it may be, but and this is where I bring Amrik Singh back. Amrik Singh is the only intellectual educationist who has been saying, please take control of your institution, make your standards better. This is the internal critique. If you internally robust, if you train people morally and intellectually, then the amount of training and amount of robust cultural robustness that we acquire, it is directly proportional to the kind of resistance that you could put to any state coming to grab your spaces. For example, why is it JNU resisted? JNU was attacked because JNU was resisting that pressure. It had created that stuck. Why is it that universities like BHU or many other universities are not even thought of being attacking? Because they are grabbed so easily. So easily, you don't need that kind of thing. The second part of this is universities in India, because the more central university we open, central universities are what is called जिसका कोई माँ बाप नहीं है. They are hanging in here. The state universities are that's why I brought Nehru, who talked about local rootedness. Now the local rootedness today means that local caste, community or configurations and political configuration matter. Therefore, state universities are also protected at some level by the local interest group. They also are the cause of their decline. But universities like JNU, unless they are internally autonomous, robust, there is no protector if the state turns against them, because they are the Maibab. And the state, the character of the state matters in this sense, because of the state, as I say, Indira Gandhi, if they think that their institution should be robust and world class, they would give them the facilitate that autonomy. If the state thinks you are an enemy, ideological opponent, then they will kill you. So this is the kind of conjuncture in which we are located. And therefore, it's a long haul. Universities fought for hundreds of years. JNU or BHU or Allahabad is not created for 50, 60 years and then filed. No, they are for next 500 years. So how we shape the society will also get reflected in the way we shape our universities. I hope I responded to some of your insights in some meaningful manner.
Wonderful.
Well, these are all in some ways, Yaksha Prashnas, very hard to sort of, I mean, they're really meant to, I guess, go deeper into the issue. There are no real clear-cut answers. I guess we have to evolve the samadhan, as we say, over a period of time. And I hope we can do it using our constitutional values and using empathy, including for the future generations. Because as you said, if the repository of intellectual knowledge and culture are decimated in our times, I don't know what we'll be leaving behind. So, being mindful of the time, Ankush, it's almost 90 minutes.
Yes, sir.
I would like to once again thank Professor Bhatyal and and all his colleagues and former students who joined from all over India. And I hope you'll sort of also visit the Rajiv Gandhi Institute of Contemporary Studies website, rgics.org. And we are trying to sort of be a platform, a non-partisan platform, and I'm saying that quite seriously, for intellectual discourse and provide some space for the kind of discussions which are not happening now, and yet we very badly need to have if something has to be done for our own future. So it's really auspicious that on Maulana Azad's birthday we could have you, Professor, speak about the issue of excellence in education and all the challenges thereon. Thank you once again, and namaskar.
Thank you so much, Mr. Mahajan. Thank you, your team, Ankush.
Thank you.